Welcome, everybody. Welcome back to Remote Access Redefined. I'm your host, Nick Cavalancia from Conversational Geek. This is the first episode of the podcast's second season. Now, over the course of the first season, we discussed the important aspects of OEM and SDK remote access integration. And you can check out that in its entirety at realvnc.com/podcast and, of course, on all major podcast platforms. Now, in this second season, we'll be taking a comprehensive look at remote access solution landscape from the perspective of RealVNC, the inventors of the VNC technology. And in this first episode of this second season, we're looking at the hidden costs of free and open source remote access solutions and why business solutions like RealVNC Connect are the smarter choice. Now, joining me for this episode are Dom Parks. Dom's the lead developer for OEM at RealVNC. Dom, thanks again for joining me. Glad to have you back.
Yeah, good to be here, Nick.
And Richard Petitt. Richard is the head of sales at RealVNC.
Yeah, great to be here.
Glad to have you. Awesome. Let's find out a little more about the two of them first before we get started. Dom, I'm going to start with you. Could you tell us a little bit about your role and how you've seen remote access software evolve over the years, and maybe what were the most important milestones?
Yeah, sure. It's a big topic. So my role is effectively as you said, the lead engineer in the OEM team. So I look after all of our OEM engagements, working with customers to get our software into their use cases. And the reason why that topic is kind of pertinent to me is because I basically joined RealVNC just before it released the first commercial version of our software back in 2004. So I've seen a lot of those milestones in real time. But yeah, the big milestones in the whole industry, I think, are, there was already remote access before VNC. You could do things like SSH. You could access devices remotely in many different ways. But RealVNC and VNC in particular brought screen sharing to that world, and it was the first big player in that market, I suppose. So it started with screen sharing for us. It was very much a LAN point-to-point IP thing, so you could connect from one computer to another within a given network. Security was very minimal, and connectivity, as I said, is very basic. So the big milestones were, let's bring some security into that. That's why RealVNC exists, and it was an obvious key thing for anybody who was coming into the space of remote access. So bringing security in, encrypted end-to-end comms, that sort of thing, enterprise authentication. And then the next thing was addressing that LAN use case, so bringing connectivity over the internet, because the internet was kind of growing at the same time as VNC was. So, making it easier to connect from one PC in one office to another somewhere else in the world. And then I think we've seen enterprise features sort of be added on, bolted on, things like file transfer, chat, and a gradual move towards higher performance connectivity. And all the while that's been going on, there's kind of been this gradual increase of what remote access means overall. So it's not just sharing a screen with, to fix a problem or to help someone through something. It's device management. It's grown into, monitoring things in real time and reacting much more quickly to problems in a network. So yeah, it's gradually been a big change over those sort of 20 or so years.
It sounds like it. Obviously, it just started with giving remote access to another system. And then on top of that, customers evolving their needs, going, we need to make it secure. We need to be able to manage it. We need to be able to monitor it. And all of those things kind of come into play as businesses have evolved. So has remote access. I appreciate the sort of the brief history, if you will, Dom. Richard, I'm going to come over to you for a second. Could you tell the audience a little bit about what your role at VNC entails? And maybe from a sales perspective, what are some of the most frequent conversations you're having with businesses about RealVNC Connect?
Yeah, so I think Dom's teed that up quite well. So I've been in the business 13 years now, working global markets. And the early days, it was a lot about point-to-point connectivity, direct connections, direct LAN connections. But we also saw a shift to customers that wanted to access devices that are over the internet, large organizations that are supporting 24/5 employees. So outsourced departments that want to support employees wherever they are in the world. So I saw a shift from people looking at direct LAN connectivity to people that want to connect over the internet. And that's really where I came in just before we did that at RealVNC. So the name VNC is well known by a lot of our customers that come to us now and say we're looking for a new tool. We go through the challenges they have with their existing tool, and the first question we ask is, well, what do you know about RealVNC? And they're like, I used you guys 20 years ago, 30 years ago, whatever. At college, I used it then. I saw it still available. Are you still the same guys? Like, yes, we're still the same guys that have that tool that you used a long time ago.
You know,
so
that's exactly what I said when I came to my interview. That's exactly what I said as well. It's like, I remember you guys in the 90s.
That's actually what I said when we first got connected for us to start making content together. I said this. I used you back in like the 90s or something for sure. So,
yeah.
And
so,
Richard,
so we get a lot of those
open source solutions.
Yeah. So with open source, I mean, a lot of the inquiries that we get from potentially new clients is we're using a free open source variant, and they're pretty transparent about what it is they're using. It's either going to be Ultra VNC, Type VNC, Tiger VNC. We still hear the odd occasion where someone's using Chicken VNC, which is always funny to hear. The common challenges that come up with those tools is, and we can dive into this in a bit more detail later on, but there's some challenges with those tools in terms of like auditing who's using it, passwords, how you authenticate to devices. And we see a real wide reach of the industries that use open source VNC. So it's not a specific industry that use it. It goes across education, retail, manufacturing. And because these open source solutions have been in place for 15, 20 years, especially if you're working in a manufacturing environment, to make a change is quite difficult because you have to shut down a machine, shut down a process, and to update anything, it's a bit of a money sink and a time sink at that point. So there has to be a real compelling reason for them to want to do that. And that's really what a lot of the conversations are about. Customers ask, well, how long is it going to take to do the transition to RealVNC? And it's a common problem that we come across, and they're interested in how they're going to onboard and how they're going to implement in a scalable way.
What's interesting is that challenge of trying to onboard, trying to adopt a new solution, make the shift from something else. It tends to lead organizations to look at, even in the case of VNC, look at free open source solutions versus ones that they actually have to pay for. And Richard, I'm going to stick with you for a moment here, just on that same kind of line of thinking here. Why do you think, just again, from getting some context from your customer conversations, why do you think that free and open source remote access solutions are actually appealing to organizations, when they're talking to you and they're saying, well, why should I pay for this?
Yeah, good question. So a lot of it is just the pure convenience of having a quick download of that tool from the internet. It doesn't take long to install that bit of tech. It's kind of install and throw away. You don't have to think about it anymore. The key will just continue to work. It's kind of low hanging fruit if you want to get something spun up very quickly and you've used a VNC product before. The challenge is really is, if something goes wrong with that particular VNC product, they need some support. There's no one really to go to apart from flinging the answer out onto the internet, into a forum, and hopefully getting a response back about, I've come across it before. Here's how you fix it. And also there's a lack of accountability as well when you install those products. Like who do you go to when something goes wrong? How do you explain it if you get flagged in an IT audit, or there's a penetration test and it's like you've got some kind of VNC product on the system? What is that, and is it up to date? Where's the contract for it? So they become difficult conversations for customers to have with their cybersecurity and information security teams as well, which is the transition to a product like RealVNC, which is we're VNC based. We have a lot of the similarities with the open source products in terms of the familiarity with the software. So it's an easier transition to make to a VNC product that also has a viewer and you connect to a server. But the point is that you have security and authentication protocols built into that, and there's a contract to say that you do have that.
Yeah, it's interesting because the conversation that you're kind of discussing almost feels like it mirrors Dom's sort of milestone discussion of 20 years, where organizations are starting off with, we just need remote access. And then they suddenly realize they need all those other things you mentioned, like where's the contract and where's the licensing and how are we getting support and where are the feature sets we need. And it's kind of interesting that that they come to those same realizations in the same way that the products have evolved over, again, the last 20 years. Dom, I'm thinking maybe from a technical perspective, what are some of the limitations? We heard Richard talk about a couple of them there, things like support, but what are some of the other limitations you've seen with free and open source solutions? I'm thinking around things like scalability of a solution throughout an entire enterprise, also things like security, which should be top of mind for organizations today. But what are some limitations that you see and challenges with open source and free solutions?
Yeah. As I mentioned, so the original VNC protocols were all pretty much insecure. They were intended for use within a network. So anything that's strictly based off of that protocol is insecure. Most of them have got their own adaptations to make them more secure, but it's maybe using some other security mechanism as a kind of secondary thing, like using an SSH tunnel to run your VNC protocol over or something like that. So I think there's some gaps potentially there and some vulnerabilities within that approach. Sometimes not. Sometimes it's going to be fine. So that's the security thing. I think the scalability thing actually plays into that too, because one of the things that we've seen kind of demanded, and it just kind of part of the enterprise world, I suppose, are things like multi-factor authentication, AD integration, SSO, single sign-on integration. So those things are security-related issues. You're trying to cut down on the number of times people are having to sign into things, or the number of credentials they're having to remember, the number of separate components that they're having to install to do one thing. So it's kind of all part of the same problem, scalability and security. But I think the underlying thing is, a bit like Richard said, you're taking this thing, you're then responsible for it entirely. It's fully DIY, and it depends on what solution you pick out of the open source ones, but you probably aren't going to get any central management of these things. So there's no way to have, say, an AD integration, not in a straightforward way anyway. Maybe there's no way to have multi-factor authentication easily, because, if you want that, you're going to have to stand up a service to do it. So yeah, it puts a lot into the person's hands, so that's good. But everything is then DIY.
Yeah,
and that DIY actually adds to the cost. And go ahead, Richard.
The other situation to come on to what Dom was saying is, so we have customers, and we had one recently where they were using a few different solutions. So they were using Ultra VNC for some offline devices in their network. They're using another tool for cloud connectivity to do standard help desk support. And they're using Microsoft Teams for another part of their remote access. And, they were basically going through a bit of a modernization and thinking about, well, we've got 3 products here that do something similar. We want a tool that actually does offline connections and has the option to do cloud connectivity. We want it for not just remote access, we want it for remote support purposes as well. So when you get into those conversations, because open source VNC it's kind of a point and shoot model, right? It can't be used for a lot of different use cases. And traditionally it's been used by engineering departments to get a point-to-point connection with a device locally. But that's kind of quite a narrow remit it has, whereas other solutions will do offline connectivity, and it will have a cloud option as well. You can have audit for everything. Those are interesting conversations to have with customers about how many solutions they use and what are the different use cases as well.
And Richard, I'm thinking about those use cases, and even when Dom talking about a lack of scalability or trying to figure out integrations and so on, it only adds to the overall, let's say, cost of ownership of a solution, whether it be the fact that something can't be accomplished, or it means they have to do extra work in order to maybe achieve, let's say, integrations as an example here. Do you find that organizations, when you're talking to them, they're underestimating I'm going to call it the hidden costs of the free and open source solutions? And maybe to have a couple of examples you could share?
Yeah, so the cost of ownership is not only in revenue, but also in the time it takes for them to sort out an issue. So, if type VNC or Ultra VNC fails for whatever reason, they're going to work out another way of getting access to it. And then they're going to look at licensing implications for fixing that issue as well. So we worked with a retail customer recently. They're accessing some point of sale devices across their European branches. They had a bit of type VNC for one of their projects, but then were using it a long time, didn't have any kind of strong authentication in place as well. So, they were considering a few different options. And the main thing was, how long is it going to take to get RealVNC spun up and actually implemented in our network? And we can give them a schedule, and we basically have to work towards what they want to get to. What's the ideal state they want to end up in? And they're like, okay, well, we'll start with these branches in Poland, then we're going to switch to these branches in Germany. And they kind of go through that process of this ringed approach where they take one section and go to the next one. So because open source solutions have generally been around a long time with a customer, there's a lot of comfort there, because it's like, oh, okay, well, to change it is going to be a bit of a hassle, but you kind of show them a path about where they can get to in a relatively short period of time, and that gives them some confidence that they can make a change in a scalable way. Because when a tool's been in place for a long time, not only you get familiar with it, but you kind of know its little nuances, you're comfortable with that. But that also comes at a bit of a risk from a security standpoint as well.
Dom, thinking about the sort of maybe even more intangible cost issues that might come up with open source and free solutions, I want to go back to thinking about the limitations that we talked about a little bit here. And maybe could you talk about, where you think these limitations and how they impact IT teams, their ability to manage and use remote access, keep it secure? What's the impact of utilizing a solution that that doesn't have all the feature sets of something paid, and what are those limitations? How do they impact IT teams?
Yeah, I think it goes back to the sort of the idea I mentioned in the last question about you've got to DIY this. You've got to bring in all these different components to do the things that might be there in a commercial solution, might be there in RealVNC. It does depend a lot on what open source solution they've gone with, but the real limitations are like, okay, you've got a screen sharing solution here. Maybe it does file transfer in a way that works for you. Maybe it doesn't. Maybe it has nothing like that within its protocol. So then you've got to find another solution that runs probably over a different network port. You've got to forward open ports and forward things. Get things between your different networks. So you've got a lot of that upfront cost of integrating it all into your world, into your use case, before you can even really start to get to grips with the limitations of the actual software. Hopefully, if it's a modern open source variant that's got some decent performance, hopefully it will have those things. But there's not been a huge amount of development on the open source VNC protocol, so it's likely to suffer in some of those ways as well. Just police streaming performance, high latency performance, and things like that. The real limitations are actually in those costs. They're in things like the fact that you've put this solution in place. You've got to do your own monitoring of vulnerabilities in that. No one's going to tell you that there's a problem with, say, TypeVNC that is causing it to be insecure. No one's going to tell you that the way you've opened the ports between these two networks is causing you an issue. You have to suddenly be responsible for all of that stuff that you probably wouldn't have to be as concerned with if you're kind of federating that to someone else.
Yeah, I was also thinking even more some practical limitations on IT teams of things like you and I have had conversations about offline, of course, about organizations using multiple solutions and them having to manage all those, learn all those solutions, figure out if all the integrations are the same. Going back to some of the security and I'll call it the cost of security or maybe insecurity is having different feature sets around what's possible. Can you establish roles? Can you give someone, admin access, but not admin access? Those kinds of things, and that lack of central visibility as well that comes into play. Thinking of those practical terms, how much of an impact do you think that has on an IT team?
Yeah, no, it's a massive impact. I think just the sort of segregation of all those different bits into different components that you have to understand, everyone has to understand really, to use them safely and securely. It's just, you have to really know what you're doing with this stuff, I think.
Yeah, it obviously sounds like sort of a gap they both are kind of laying out here between the perceived and actual value of the free and the open source solutions here. And maybe Richard, again, you're the one talking to customers every day. I know you are too, Dom, but in a different way. Richard's hearing all the problems they're having without a solution. And Dom, you're of course talking to customers that are engaged, but and I'm not trying to minimize either of your roles there, but you kind of get where I'm coming. But Richard, maybe can you share an example of a business where they struggled with the challenges that we're talking about before switching to RealVNC Connect? And then Dom, if you've got some wonderful context you could add to that as well.
Yeah, just what Dom was saying as well, there is a slight cost involved in how they can manipulate their open source solution to do what they want it to do. So we spoke to a client recently that was concerned about their open source product because they've been asked to provide some audit logs and know who connected, when they connected, and identifying the user as well that made the connection. And these things are quite hard to pull out of an open source VNC solution. And one of the reasons for that is because it's often a shared password that's being used. So there's no way to say Dom connected or Nick connected to a device if you're using the same password. The time it takes to try and pick through that and work out, okay, well, the connection was at 15:29, who was around at that point? You have to have that level of rigor in your auditing process to work out who did what, and that's mainly for penetration testing, but also the access controls that are available or not available within some open source products as well. So, there's the benefits of finding an alternative solution is that you do get that auditability within a solution. And what Dom was saying about it's a DIY solution with the open source is true. And it also the time it takes IT departments to administer a tool like that that does add up. If you're spending like 20 minutes a day trying to pick through and work out who made a connection when, and then something else comes up that you've got to deal with. Like IT departments nowadays, they've got so many different hats to wear, and they could do with more time to actually get into the strategic side of their IT infrastructure and future proofing, rather than making slight adjustments, which after some time end up to hours and hours a month doing something that you don't actually need to do anymore.
Yeah, I guess I think that's a really good example of the auditing requirement there, because it's a bit like trying to fit a square peg into a round hole or something. We've got the old open source VNC. It doesn't really have even a concept of what users connecting, and it's how do you split out that? You've got to build some layer on top of that to work out how who's been modifying what, who's been accessing what system. And it's just ever more a key requirement of IT systems everywhere that who's doing what, who's allowed to do what, how long they're allowed to be accessing a particular system. I think the stuff that I've seen from customers has been at quite a high level. It's been just they've got stakeholders, they've got people in management who are worried about the provenance of the solutions that they're implementing. They're taking much more interest in the kind of both the where's this software come from, what's the the software bill of materials for this software, and their stakeholders and their board. They need to know that all these risks are minimized, and you can't easily do that with an open source project always. So it's a case of, dealing with that kind of slightly amorphous concern in a way that's suitable for all the board type concerns that people have. Sometimes it's just down to the literal origin of where does this open source project come from, what country is it based in. So that's something that's been a big source of people converting over to RealVNC.
Yeah, if I can build on that just a second. So earlier this year, over in the EU, there's now the Digital Operational Resilience Act, so DORA, which we've been getting questionnaires from existing customers about, because they're going through a process now of making sure that this is largely affecting financial institutions, right, and making sure there is a plan with their vendors and OEMs in the event there's an incident, right? So we've been getting new vendor assessment forms about that from existing customers, and also new ones coming through to say, have you got this? Like, can you prove that you are DORA compliant? So again, with open source, that'll be really hard to provide some evidence of, right? Because there's nothing around officially that would cover that. So again, the cost of time to state and claim that your open source VNC is compliant and does hit these markers is going to take some time. So to have that contract with a company that's going to be able to do that for you and provide you the evidence and compliance and regulation for those type of things really does feed into the fact that open source VNC struggles in those areas when new legislation comes out and you've got to provide that evidence.
It's interesting. You both are teetering around these issues of, and Dom, you said the word concerns. There are concerns that organizations have. And of course, when you've got a product name that has the initials VNC in it, there's some validity to the concerns because organizations are even looking at RealVNC and going, is it a really real solution? That sort of thing. And they're really wondering, is it just something slapped on top of the open source? And they really want to understand, is it a business grade solution or not? And Richard, maybe I could stick with you for a moment here. And could you talk a little bit about what makes RealVNC Connect a business grade solution and maybe some of the key features that support?
Yeah, so it's an interesting point around the real in front of VNC. And we do get customers that come to us and say, are you guys the real VNC, or is this RealVNC slapped on top of it? So something for our marketing team to work on, perhaps. But yeah, with the differences between them, or what makes it a business grade. So we've got customers that shifted to us because they're using open source VNC and they want to have a more robust solution. They find us and they're like, okay, these are the things they got. They got file transfer, they got access controls in place, they have an on-premise management console to manage our license keys. They have file transfer, they have chat, all those things you'd expect as like table stakes features as well. And the ability to have an offline connection, but mixing with a hybrid connectivity where you can do a cloud connection as well, is appealing. Our cloud services are important for us to get right from a commercial, but also security standpoint, because cloud services have to be extremely robust from a security perspective. They have to have the correct ISO implementation as well, not just in the data centers, but also the product development process has to have that in place as well. So yeah, we get interrogated all the time about what are our processes. Please prove it. We need to show our stakeholders in the business that this is a rock solid, robust solution. And we're happy to provide all the documentation needed to do that. So yeah, the table stakes features like file transfer and chat, they'll always be around. What happens next is what Dom was referring to at the start, which is not just getting access to the screen of a device, but really getting into, can I fix this machine silently without actually going into it to see what's going on? I could just see what's happening and have a more of a remote device management of it. So yes, we're highly interrogated on our claims around security and access controls. And most of our conversations, particularly in the sales department, is providing that evidence and that validity to the solution from the customer concerns. So they want to make sure they choose the right tool. We're based in the UK. We have a small office in the States as well. We do work with a large partner network, right? So resellers and distributors, and they also have questions for us, right? So we work a lot in the Middle East, we work a lot in Asia, and those companies that are looking at our solution going through a partner, the partners need to be obviously educated on what our proposal is and what our security claims are. And it's not always easy, right? Because you've got language and cultural barriers in place. So this is why our proposition about providing a reliable, secure, and fast remote access tool, you hang on those three pillars in your kind of go-to market. And yeah, it's providing that evidence really that we have what we need in place for us to be a professional product.
And out of curiosity, you talked about features. And I'm gonna say it this way, sort of like you're telling me the features that you're very proud of, that you think that are very important, and I know that they are. I'm just kind of giving some context. I'm wondering, kind of look at this a different perspective here. Are those the main features that customers are looking for? And if not, what are the ones that customers are typically coming and saying, well, we need A, B, and C? What are those, or are they the same features entirely? You're just kind of rattling them.
Yeah. So a lot of customers that we speak to that are coming from bigger tools where remote access and screen sharing is just one of the things that they do. And the customer's like, you know what, I don't actually need all these things anymore. Like, this is a bloated product. I just need a point and shoot model. And that's where we have good success and good conversations with clients, right? One of the biggest things we've seen probably in the last 12 to 18 months is people's insistence on SSO, so single sign-on, to be available across whatever IDP protocol they're using. So we'll have support for Azure and Entra ID, Okta, but these things are now expected of a solution, right? It's not like something you pay for as an add-on. It's something that has to be included in the solution for them to either consider it. So SSO is certainly the biggest shift from an authentication standpoint. And no one wants to create another password. They just want it to work with their existing setup, and it's much easier for them to just manage that way. So SSO insistence is now a requirement really for any solution that a customer's considering.
And on that topic of security, Dom, how does RealVNC Connect actually address some of the security issues we talked about? We've mentioned SSO. I've mentioned things like being able to have roles and delegation of permissions within remote access, things like that. So how does RealVNC Connect actually try to address all of those security issues as best it can?
Yeah. So it comes back to the same brief overview of the kind of steps through the remote access landscape that we went through at the beginning, where, the first step was bringing end-to-end encryption to our software. That's what we did when first commercializing the whole thing. We've updated that since. You're looking at modern ciphers, modern algorithms for encryption, and a kind of constant focus on what should we be basing security on, what are the right ciphers to use here, what are the right approaches, and adding in things that are the recommendations of organizations like NIST and others. And then, I think the enterprise-grade authentication that we've been talking a lot about. So the single sign-on, both from your client software to the server software, but also for your account for managing the whole thing. And that's another area where there are multiple sides to security, but having an account that you can manage all of your users, all of your devices from, is a security element. It's something that you can then integrate with AD. As Richard said, you can specify what sort of security each different user has, what permissions they've got. So I think that's a major part of it. But underlying all of it, from our point of view, and kind of our differentiator, is this security first ethos. What you buy from us is secure by design and secure by default, and we kind of aim to make that easy, make it hard to make it insecure. We do things like the open box audit with Q53. We get penetration testing, as Richard's mentioned, and just the whole way the clients have been designed. They've always had end-to-end encryption since we first added encryption to the VNC protocol, to RFB, and that means that the ethos is they don't trust the environment they're running in, whether that's within your LAN or within the wider internet or via our own cloud services. The clients don't trust that, so you don't need to rely on us being secure for your connection to be secure and to remain secure in the future as well. After you've finished, because we have systems like perfect forward secrecies. Even if those sessions are recorded, no one's going to be able to decrypt them later. So I think it's just that whole ethos, really.
And then, Richard, obviously customers have to pay to get a commercial solution like this. How do you typically position RealVNC Connect as a cost-effective solution as compared to free tools? Are there any ways that you get them away from thinking about free or open source solutions and actually paying? What's the pitch, I guess, in some ways to get them to go, you don't want free or open source for these reasons, and this is why you want to look at RealVNC Connect as a cost-effective way of actually accomplishing your needs?
Yeah, so there's a couple of scenarios, really. Sometimes there is a direct need to make a change quite quickly because open source VNC has been flagged in an IT audit, and the business said, you need to get this sorted out pretty quickly because the next time we have an audit, we can't have this happen again, right? So there's suddenly a freeing up a budget, and they have to do something quite quickly. Then there's other customers that are looking at future-proofing their future state, right? So they want to have an audit of what they're currently using for tools. Are they set up for the next 2 years in terms of like that product roadmap being robust and addressing what they might need to do in a year or so? So there's a couple of different scenarios. One's reactive, one's proactive, like looking longer term at what they're doing. The RealVNC product, when we put that forward to customers, we talk a lot about what their intention is for the next 18 months, 2 years. Customers like to see what the roadmap is, so we try and offer a roadmap for the next 6 months, so we can say, look, you're not just buying the product as it is now. This is what we have coming. And a recent example is the on-premise management console. Added value to the to the customer that they can start realizing in the next few weeks or so. So, but budgets are tight. We appreciate that across the industry. There's always things that IT departments need, and that the emergence of operational technology environments as well. There's suddenly a whole gap here where that needs to be addressed as well, and how they need to support those networks. So the commercial side is really looking at, well, this is the cost now, but this is what you're investing in with your IT strategy. Here's how we'll move with you in the next 6 months. If they want to see a longer roadmap, then we can give them some pointers on what that might look like, whether it's remote device management, for example. And because same as the rest of the industry, we're offering a subscription. So it's within our interest to show you what our roadmap looks like. It's within our roadmap to keep developing the product, because after a year, the customer can make a decision about whether they've seen enough or whether there's something else in the market that they like the look of. So really, it's about having a transparent conversation about current and future state, what they're looking to achieve, the direction that they have for the next 2-3 years. One of the strong points about when we talk to customers that are coming from open source VNC is because they've been using a VNC product for a long time, we are a robust, secure version of that with cloud connectivity obviously available as well. And we've been running as a company since 2002, so we have a pretty good body of historical success with remote access and screen sharing that often helps customers make that decision about, we're not going anywhere. Right? We've been around an awfully long time. We're subject matter experts in this, and here's 50,000 customers that think the same thing. So, there's a lot of confidence we can provide customers and security to know that this isn't our first time, and we're able to provide that robust solution for them.
Great answer there. I think it makes a really compelling case, especially when you're talking about the roadmap, not just getting a point in time version of RealVNC like you would with, let's say, something like open source. It's continually updated, continually improved, and so on. I want to go back to one of the feature sets that I mentioned that I think also adds some of that value, which is the centralized management. And I'm just wondering your thoughts on what role you think that centralized management inside RealVNC Connect actually makes it a better fit for businesses compared to free tools.
Yeah, I think there's a phrase Richard mentioned earlier, the sort of table stakes stuff, is that some of these things that come along with centralized management are just, you have to have it, really. And that's things like the AD integrations that we've talked about, Enter and Okta. You can't really have that without some form of central management to integrate that. Whether it's managing your devices through our portal, or whether it's managing devices and accounts and subscriptions and users through the portal, or whether it's doing the same thing through the on-prem console, you need that kind of central place to look at what you've got, see what licenses you've got, and in the near future bring diagnostic information, make connections directly from those things, get that audit event detail that you won't get without that kind of central place to manage all this stuff. So I think they just give you that as a person implementing a remote access solution. They give you that place to have control over what everyone's doing, and some of it we federate out to the OIDC providers like Enter and Okta. But there's that place that you can say, here's a load of devices. They have these users able to access them. I can make a connection directly from this one single pane of glass and get access. So yeah, I think it's that's what that part really brings.
And Richard, going back to a feature set that I also mentioned a little early on about the idea of having specific remote access permissions to resources, admin level access, non-admin level access during remote access sessions, things like that. How often do those come into customer conversations?
Yeah, there's two levels to that really. So, within the product, if a customer is using a cloud service, we have these discovery rights that can be set. So you can say, okay, well, I want the HR team to have access to their computers, but I don't want them to discover the devices that are sitting in the procurement team, for example. So you have those discovery rights that you can set at a master level. But then when you connect through to a device, what we do at RealVNC is say, well, you can discover the device. Doesn't mean you'll be able to connect to the device. You need to be authorized. What Don was talking about with AD authentication, you need to be authorized by group policy to allow you to actually access the device, and it's going to recognize your credentials to do that. So there's kind of two levels that we have. with the product. Can you just say the last part of the question again?
Well, it was just simply just how often do the idea of those feature sets come into customer conversations? I'm just wondering how often are they wondering, can I have that level of granularity so it's not just, Bob can remote access into another system, it's and Bob can do these specific things or has this level of access. Does that granular level come into conversations very often?
Yeah, it does. So we worked with a company in Germany last month. So they have a central team in Germany, but they also have regional support branches as well throughout Europe. And they wanted a situation where they had, tier 1 access, tier 2 access, tier 3. So tier 1 being the guys that support the VIPs in that company, and they just wanted to have those tier 1 guys do that. So they were able to kind of segregate out those devices and groups of devices to ensure that the person receiving support was getting support from the right team, essentially. So yeah, that does come up, especially with larger clients that either go across countries or different territories, because they kind of cut and slice who supports who, essentially. We do also have clients that run a support team that's 24 hours a day, 5 days a week. And they will not open up so that the teams can support people wherever they are in the world. And they're only interested in getting a quick fix out to that person that's got an issue, that's put their hand up and says, yeah, I need some IT support help. So, having that ability to set discovery rights and also who can authenticate to a device is valuable, especially for large help desk teams as well.
And the last question I think I have around security, I'm going to go back to you, Dom, is just the idea of organizations. You yourself, I think, even mentioned this early on in the discussion today, of things like organizations wanting an on-premises solution, something they can control, something they know is secure. You mentioned, having security across sessions over the internet and so on. And now we've, of course, got secure cloud brokered connections that are available here. Is the fear of a remote session being accessed, by a threat actor, that sort of thing, going across the internet, is it justified by organizations today, or is that completely secure?
Yeah, so I guess there are two sides to this. There's the technical answer, which I guess you could quite quickly say, no, the fear is not really justified. But there are realities of business relationships and legislation and global tension, and actually the fundamental thing is actually some people have an offline use case. That's just all there is to it. So clearly in those cases they need an on-prem thing. They don't want a cloud brokered solution. But I think if you do have a use case that's going to be, in accessing the internet in a situation where both endpoints are internet accessible devices, then yeah, technically no. The cloud brokered solution is just what you said. It's cloud brokered. It's not cloud relayed unless we need to relay it, and in which case we've still got an end-to-end encrypted connection regardless from client to server. So mathematically and in engineering terms, there's no way that that's going to be visible to us or visible to whichever data center that's traveling through any more than it would be if you made that connection yourself over the internet. So I think it's a very hard one to argue, though, when you've got a commandment within your business that says you can't have anything going into these cloud data centers. Because I think the assumption for a lot of these use cases is we're storing some kind of data here, we're storing some kind of important thing. What we're doing for cloud brokering is that literally just figuring out where two endpoints are and working out the best way to connect them. But yeah, it's a difficult conversation to overcome. But I think technically it's pretty straightforward.
And then leveling up the security conversation, just one last question I'm thinking of is, there's a lot of organizations and industries where they require certifications or standards around the security of the software products. I'm thinking about things like supply chain attacks and that sort of thing. How does RealVNC, the organization, look from this viewpoint? I guess, in other words, maybe Dom, I'll start with you. How does it prove its security and compliance? And Richard, I'd love to hear from you as well.
Yeah, it's as before, the open approach to security. We publish the audits that Q53 have done. We publish the penetration testing results. We react really quickly to CVEs, vulnerabilities that are identified in our software and the dependencies. We've adopted standards like ISO 27001, which is a kind of continual improvement, continual audit of everything we do in terms of security, data security. So I think it's there in the ethos, and we've got a lot of information on our website, on our security website, that can hopefully put people's minds at rest, or at least give more information on those topics.
Yeah, so I can echo that from customers that come through as well. In the onboarding process we go through with sourcing and procurement departments, very keen to get our security information from us. We have a team that sorts out their assessment forms, onboarding forms, outrigger forms. We're pretty well versed in these sort of things by now. Probably the biggest thing we've done in the last couple of years is have the ISO 27001 certificate. And when we talk about that with customers, they'll often put it to us to say, well, does that just apply to your data centers? No, it applies to everything that we have to do internally to actually develop the product. And that provides a bit more reassurance for customers that, it's not just something that we've paid for, it's something that we have to work towards every year and prove it every year as well. So yeah, that's what customers are interested in. Most of our conversations, we say pretty early on, like, we assume we're going to have a security conversation at some point. Let's start that now, because we're pretty confident in what our offering is. When they start testing the solution and testing it in their environment, in a sandbox environment, and it's going well, it's like, well, let's talk about security now, because some of the organizations that we work with have quite long processes for that, depending on the size of them. But that process definitely has to start earlier rather than later.
And Richard, sticking with you for a minute, I want to shift gears here. We're kind of approaching the final stretch of our podcast today, and I want to get a little bit more practical here. Maybe just get some practical advice from you. What are the top 3 things that you think businesses should be actually considering when evaluating remote access solutions?
Yeah, I had to think about that before the call. I think what I was talking about earlier with checking to make sure that the solution is established but also has a future roadmap that can be shown. They should also be looking for what solution is going to be the lowest touch in terms of implementing and onboarding. If it takes 6 months to see the effects of it, is that really an acceptable timescale to do that? And also, when they're looking at solutions, they should consider how quickly the pre-sales process gets to them. Are they getting the support they need from an early stage? Is it mapped to their time frame? And they should also interrogate what the post-sale process is. Like, once they've tested it, onboarded it, what does the next 3 to 4 weeks looks like? What does the next 1 to 2 weeks looks like? So they should be looking at how quickly they can get up to speed and whether they can be supported when they do that. When it comes to like comparing features, it won't take long. Like, they'll have a good idea about what they need and what the important points are to hit. And they might have a nice to have list where it's like, well, we don't need this right now, but we'd be interested to see what you're going to do to develop in this area. But in terms of feature comparison, that can be done pretty quickly. What we tend to find is that customers will discover an awful lot once they start getting their hands on it and testing the solution for speed, latency, reliability, how robust it is. Can I do a cloud connection? Can I do an offline connection easily? Those sort of things. So yeah, I'd say it's the implementation, the scaling, and also the pre and post sales support that they're expecting.
And just adding on to that, Richard, any advice on for organizations trying to get buy-in from stakeholders when moving to a business grade solution that they're now going to have to pay for?
Yeah, so it depends on the scenario, but yeah, stakeholder consensus is how decisions are often made nowadays. So we'll generally work with the service desk team, we'll work with the security department, we'll work with sourcing, we'll work with procurement departments as well. There has to be sign off from each level, and then the IT director and IT manager, or it might be someone that's in charge of operational technology. What we try and do is provide as much information upfront as possible. And sometimes we'll put together a slide deck and we'll say to our, what we call account champion, that we appreciate there's going to be some sign off needed later on in the process. Tell us the key points now. We'll start to build a deck for you. And then once we feel like we're in a good place from a testing perspective, you have that collateral already to present internally if needed. Ideally, we'd help out with putting those stakeholders in early, and we say, well, it is a security conversation and we need to start that now. Who do we need to speak to make that easier for you to make that to happen? So yeah, a lot of it is it's a highly collaborative process essentially, but it can be tricky sometimes, especially if some of the stakeholders are across different territories, right? Lining up isn't always easy, but we're keen to work out the time frame they're working towards, and then we can work out who needs to come in at what point as well. We don't want to waste people's time, so as long as we're tracking with the customer and aligning the whole way along, then we'll have a good idea about who needs to come in at what point.
And Dom, assuming that now Richard's got his job done and an organization's got buy-in and they're willing to buy a solution, so now we're thinking about implementation, what advice would you give the IT teams that are thinking about transitioning from free to business grade solutions like RealVNC Connect? What should that process look like?
I mean, mostly, hopefully, this has already begun as part of the sort of conversations with Richard and his team. But I think you need to, a bit like with the OEM world that I'm very familiar with, I think the best bet is to take a step back and look at the bigger picture, because there are some fairly extensive differences between the open source and our solution that we've already gone through. So whilst Connect might be a drop-in solution in some cases, in others it probably shouldn't be. You should really think about what you're trying to achieve. If you've implemented a load of different things that are adjacent, like you've got some solution for transferring files, you've got some solution for screen sharing, some solution for maybe even for chat, maybe using Teams. Maybe you can actually take a step back and look at this and say, actually we can just do this all with, for the use case we have, Connect will do all of that, or maybe it won't. But it's worth really, starting with that. And I think, again, taking advice from my own OEM engagements, start as simple as possible. Talk to us, talk to our sales and support teams, and figure out what the best way to get this going is. But I think, I think it's really taking a step back and looking at what you've got now, trying to identify the gaps and implement the most sensible use of RealVNC in there.
The final two questions that I have, I think, are going to be helping close this out. I think it's starting with you, Dom. Maybe what are some of the common pitfalls businesses should avoid during the transition? And Dom, if you would go first, and Richard, I'd also like to get your input on that same question.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of carries on from the previous one a bit, doesn't it? I think people might do the opposite thing that I just said. They might just try and replicate an existing open source component by just dropping in a local on-prem RealVNC thing, and you miss out on a lot of the extra stuff. You might even configure, because it is possible to configure our stuff to work with open source VNCs. You might even end up just missing all of the features that we've added, like interactive connectivity establishment, the encryption, and just as purely as a way of simply replacing what you've got. If you don't take that step back and look at what you're trying to achieve in terms of security or whatever, then you could miss out on a lot. And I think customers should be careful about staged migrations as well, because, as I said, the open source VNC it's almost like a subset of what we do. So you can make our software talk to it. So you could easily imagine a situation where an IT team says, "Well, we've got these ones; they're open source. We'll keep those as open source for now. RealVNC will talk to those, and it works fine." But I think you need to be careful about that, because you really need to be sure about what your users are doing, how they're using the software, and what they're, if your purpose was for added security, you're not getting it if you're doing that. If you're kind of halfway migrating to RealVNC and taking it so slowly in that way. So I think you need to be really careful. You could really compromise security if people aren't aware that they're using an incomplete solution. So again, it's that bigger picture stuff, like what you're trying to replace, what are the requirements for individual components of your solution. Can we replace it all with RealVNC? And if not, what else do we need? And that's really where I see it, I think, pitfall wise.
Yeah. And Richard, pitfalls you're thinking about?
Yeah, just going on from what Dom said there. As you said, it's some customers will just take our solution, use it as a direct replacement for what they already have, and try and mirror it as much as they can, which is fine in some situations. But to get the full investment from it, and this is what we try and talk about in the pre-sale side, is what else can they do if they move to our solution? What else is available? And we try and talk a lot about, we want to free up the IT person's time to do other things. We'll try and talk about the fact we have APIs, for example. So if you've got a large estate of 5,000 and 300 of those devices haven't been connected to in 6 months because they've been re-imaged or whatever, or trashed, the APIs allow you to just go into your account and remove them very quickly through an API. It's those things that again, look a bit more medium term about where you can, install it now, it will hit the immediate requirement, but this is the next thing you can do and how you can make your life easier in the longer run. So automation is something that we talk about quite a bit with customers coming through to make their lives easier so they can do more interesting things and they have that time to organize their strategy properly.
The last question I'm thinking about here is just the one thing that you both wish that businesses understood about what makes a remote access solution appropriate for their business use. And maybe Dom, again, I'll go back to you, and Richard, I'd love to have you follow up. So what's the one thing you wish businesses just got about remote access that you would make it a definite appropriate use for them?
I've got to say one thing, but I think based on all the
you
discussion
can only get one,
had,
just one.
Yeah. I think based on all the discussion, it's really that total cost of ownership thing. Like, you've got a total cost of ownership of an open source solution that you may not be aware of versus a subscription that you are very much aware of. And I think that's the biggest thing that I would say. But there are lots of things that we've touched on, like roadmap, vulnerabilities, but they all feed into that one kind of bottom line, I suppose, metric, really.
Yeah. So the one thing is getting the most out of your investment. So during COVID, we had a lot of people that came and used our software to allow staff to be able to work from home, use their home device, connect to their corporate device. And we saw a big increase that year. So I think the main thing is that remote access and screen sharing often doesn't just cover one use case, it can cover a few different use cases. So to get the most from your investment, you should consider things like, well, can staff work from home using the software? Can we also provide support to internal and external people? Can we support contractors if they suddenly come on board? And another use case is, can we have third-party contractors securely come into a device in our network to do a job very quickly? So you've got sort of 3 or 4 different use cases there that you can achieve with one solution. So when you go into looking at the market and working out what you need for a specific project, there are other things that remote access and screen sharing is useful for. So it's worth considering that when you're looking at an investment, because you'll get a lot more from it if you have expanded use cases that you hadn't quite thought of in the immediate term.
Awesome, guys. Really great conversation today. I appreciate you both being here. This is all the time that we do have for today. So those of you that are watching or listening, if you'd like more information on RealVNC, you can, of course, visit realvnc.com. And remember, this is the first episode in season 2 of RealVNC's podcast series. So be on the lookout for future podcast episodes and your choice of podcast platform. Thanks a lot for listening, and we'll catch you all on the next one.